everyone, so in this video I'm going to focus on the character Crooks in Of Mice and Men. So themes that you could focus on through Crooks could be the theme of justice, loneliness and hope. So the question on that was to come up in the exam, then Crooks would be a good character to maybe explore that theme through. How he is presented, he is proud, aloof, so that is textual evidence used to describe Crooks, and he's also vulnerable and isolated. The key scenes that he's in, and think about he's in very little actually, which also might signify how he's segregated on the ranch, and he's never really around in all of the scenes that we have with the other migrant workers. But his conversation with Lenny, and was when he's being quite cruel, when he's almost winding Lenny up, but then how actually he shows his vulnerable side to Lenny when he admits his loneliness. When he talks about his hopes potentially of joining the ranch with George, Candy and Lenny. So George isn't there, but Candy and Lenny are talking about how they're going to put their money together and to have their own sense of freedom, I guess, their own land. And although Crooks said that he never believes anyone will get their own land, and he's quite pessimistic, he's temporarily hopeful in that moment. And then also we have the key scene with Curly's wife, and when she threatens to get him strung up. So I've got quite a few key quotations here for Crooks, and I think every single one of them, to be honest, is from chapter 4, which I think if you were going to talk about Crooks is the main section of the novella that you will focus on. So I'll go into those in more depth on the next slides. In terms of linking his character to the context, the main thing that you will talk about is racial segregation. I'm not going to talk about that much in this video because you have other resources to go away and look at for that. But remember that Crooks is a character used by Steinbeck to potentially show the effects of racial segregation. He is not allowed in the bunkhouse with the white men, and he's isolated in his own room, a place in the barn with the ranch animals. He's deemed a subclass citizen, as African Americans were in the 1930s, and would attend different schools, use different public services, even toilets. So that is reflected through Crooks in the novella. Also, the part where Curly's wife threatens him, this then alludes to lynching. A study in 2015 found that nearly 4,000 black people were lynched in the 12 southern states. And if you think they're just the ones documented, that number is likely to be much higher. 70% of those lynchings were black people. So although you might think, oh, well, like 70%, you maybe would think it's higher, think about the population and what the ratio would potentially be between whites and blacks. And if you think about it in that way, that percentage is incredibly high. Also, when you were doing research, think about what black people could be lynched for, and how trivial some of those reasons were. Okay, also what is good to think about, especially to be critical to reach for those higher marks, is to consider the writer's intention and the bigger picture of the novel. So Steinbeck in a letter once wrote, "I am sad for a time when one must know a man's race before his work can be approved or disapproved." So in that sense, what can we say about how Steinbeck felt about racial segregation, about racial abuse in the time that he was living? The fact that he says this makes me think that by including Crooks as only black character on the ranch, I don't know, is he trying to challenge racial segregation? Is he angered that a person is judged because of the colour of their skin? Because this is what that line that he says personally in a letter seems to point at. So that is a really, really good quote to engage with and to consider, to think about what Steinbeck is trying to do through the power of his writing. Okay, so some of the key quotations. So Crooks says to Lenny, "A guy goes nuts if he ain't got nobody. A guy gets lonely, he gets sick." So despite being aloof, which means quite distant, to be quite indifferent towards others, maybe quite cold, potentially in this scene he is revealing his true loneliness to Lenny, and he's confiding in him. The idiom of going nuts conveys how he suffers mentally since he is separated from the rest of the men. Notice, and he does this quite often, when he refers to himself, quite often he uses third person, and he does in this line here, when he says a guy. It's as if he is trying to detach himself from the realization that he is the one that ain't got nobody. He is the one that is completely isolated on that ranch, and in ways doesn't have a friend in the world. The chapter begins with him putting the ointment on his back, and it ends in the same way as well. It's as if to emphasize how his loneliness at the end of that chapter once again leaves him sick, and once again alone, tending to his own sickness. He also says that nobody gets to heaven and nobody gets no land. So we could say that Crooks is very pessimistic, very cynical. In that sense, he doesn't seem to have much hope for himself or for anybody else. But you could also argue that he is realistic. He doesn't believe in pipe dreams. So yeah, I've pretty much just said that here. It might be because he has limited opportunities as an African American in 1930s America. Yet the nameless pronoun, when he says nobody, he's not just talking about himself, he is talking about people in general. So that might suggest that he believes that no one will truly earn land, regardless of their race or their gender. So that could be him defying the notion of the American dream. That is also something contextually that you could link to Crooks' character. He also tells Lenny that he is not a descendant of slaves, but of landowners. So the fact that him and his family might have lost so much, it is no wonder then that he doesn't believe in the American dream, considering the position that he's in now. So while he might have a very bleak outlook on society, on humanity, you could almost question who could blame him. He later says, however, so yes, we've got here him being very cynical, he doesn't have much hope. This does change, albeit very temporarily, when he hears Lenny and Candy talking about their plans to own their own ranch. And through this line, we see the first sign potentially of his hope and his dreams for the future. So he says, if you guys would want a hand to work for nothing, just his keep, why, I'd come and lend a hand. Notice as well the ellipses here and the dashes, which could mirror his hesitation. I think the reason that he's so aloof and distances himself potentially from the other men could be because he is fearful of rejection, which he is likely to potentially have faced throughout his lifetime. So although being aloof and aggressive, it might be a way to him to mask his loneliness and his vulnerability and to protect himself. Yet now he is willing to work for nothing and just his keep. Okay, so he's willing to work for the bare minimum. This could perhaps illustrate how he values companionship over finance. This might be his chance now to not actually be separated from the other men, but to work on that ranch alongside white men. And that might be the first chance that he's had that opportunity. The future tense here as well in this line also signals his potential hopes for the future, and the fact that his future could be different to what he had imagined. Okay, this is just a quick one. But Crooks said sharply, "You got no right to come in my room. This here is my room. Nobody got any right in here but me." And he has a copy of the California Civil Code. He says this to Lenny when he first comes into the room. So I'm not going to analyse this quote really, but it's just a point to make that he has very little rights as an African American in the 1930s. but he ensures that he does understand the rights that he has, and he might feel that that is important. Yet, in ways you could argue that only serves to isolate him further. The fact that other men isolate him, he also isolates himself, which leads to, I guess, his lonely existence on the ranch. He also, I think this is when Candy arrives, he says, it narrates, it was difficult for Crooks to conceal his pleasure with anger. So the abstract nouns here of pleasure and anger are juxtaposed. This could be perhaps to show how conflicted Crooks is. So he is ostracized by the other men. So in turn, he prohibits the other men from coming into his room. However, in this chapter, we do discover how deep down it does seem that he craves human interaction. Yet he does feel the need to mask that pleasure with hostility. Again, this reinforces what I've already gone through, that perhaps he just wants to protect himself from any more pain or rejection. But this does show his vulnerability. Also, he said when Lenny questions, well, why is it that you're separated from the other men? Because racial segregation, to Lenny, he would have no understanding of that. And then, so this simple sentence reflects the simplicity of Crooks's situation. When Lenny does ask that, he simply says, "'cause I'm black," to depict how there is absolutely no other reason for Crooks to be cast aside. There is no personal vendetta there. He is simply treated differently for the colour of his skin. Sadly, he's a victim of racial discrimination. No matter what he does, this is going to lead to a lonely life for him on the ranch. And the other men just adhere to that. Then lastly, last quote I'll focus on is Curly's wife, and when she threatens Crook and threatens to have him strung up on a tree. As a result of that, Crooks reduced himself to nothing. No ego, no personality, no nothing. So just as Crooks starts to show his vulnerability, he dares to dream for the first time. So if you think about his state of equilibrium, at this point he's maybe hopeful for the first time. Then just as things are looking good, we can almost predict that something is going to disturb that. And Curly's wife quickly reminds him of his place in society. The verb strung emphasizes how powerless Crooks really is. Whether this is simply a threat or not, an empty threat, we don't know. But he would understand how this could be a reality for him. And with that, go back to your revision and research on lynching. His anger and glimpses of cruelty that we see in chapter 4, but also his hope, vanishes, and he instead becomes nothing. The repetition of no could convey how African Americans were stripped of everything, to the point that they cannot even possess their own personality. I feel personally that it is one of the saddest quotes throughout the entire novella. It is as if he merely exists to serve others, and is even in this scene stripped of the possibility and hope of friendship. Right, okay guys, I hope that helps. Good luck with your revision on Crooks.